All right, good morning, Bio 30. So at this point, we are well into our blood and immunity unit. I want to make this video to just kind of do a general overview of the immune response. Now, first off, we need to remember, I'm going to do a bit of talking before I get to the diagram. Let's just review kind of the 3 lines of defense. So our body has these kind of 3 lines of defense to protect us against pathogens. The first line of defense is really more of a physical barrier to prevent pathogens from entering our body. So our best line of defense really is our intact skin. Skin does a pretty good job of preventing pathogens from entering our body. Skin also has acidic secretions that keeps the pH roughly between 3 to 5 to prevent growth of bacteria. We also have mucous membranes and lysozymes that will also kind of prevent pathogens from entering. We have things like mucus and cilia in our respiratory tract to, again, trap and prevent things from entering our body. So that's kind of the main idea of the first line of defense. There's some other organs involved, but skin, mucous membranes, cilia, lysozymes, those are kind of the big ones. So the second line of defense is then needed if a pathogen does invade that first line. So if it actually enters our body. Now, our second line of defense is also non-specific. Okay, so the first and second line of defense are non-specific, and the third line of defense is specific. What I'm referring to by specific and non-specific is whether it's attacking a specific microbe or whether it's just kind of a general cleaning up of the pathogens. So the second line of defense largely involves macrophages. So there's 2 types of white blood cells, your monocytes and your neutrophils. Monocytes can mature into macrophages, and they phagocytize, so they engulf pathogens, and they kind of just swallow them up. We've learned about phagocytosis before. Neutrophils do a very similar thing where they will kind of engulf a pathogen and they will release chemicals to digest the pathogen. And when they do that, they leave behind kind of cellular debris and protein, and that is the formation of pus. So overall, the second line of defense responds mainly to cuts and localized injuries, and it can result in pus or it can result in inflammation, which is that swelling and kind of redness. And if needed, if the kind of response from the second line of defense in those macrophages, the neutrophils, if it's not strong enough, our body could purposely develop a system-wide defense of the fever. So remember, the fever is a defense mechanism. It is a sign that we're sick, but it's the body's way of resetting our temperature, resetting kind of our thermostat to a higher temperature, because bacteria and viruses can't really survive at that higher temperature as well. So again, it's another defense mechanism, but if the body gets too hot, then we know that that can be denaturing to our enzymes and very dangerous. All right, so second line of defense involves kind of phagocytosis, inflammation, and fever as a way to kind of defend our body. Then that leads us into the third line of defense. The third line of defense is a specific defense against very certain antigens. So I'm going to walk us through this overview of the immune response here and filling in the blanks. All right, so what we have here is at number 1, something is clearly entering the body. What's happening is these little markers. So we have surface markers, and that is going to be our antigen. So antigens are surface protein markers that are a way of the body recognizing foreign invaders, and as well as a way of our body kind of recognizing what is ourself and what is an invader. Number 2, what's happening here is this big blue blob is swallowing up that kind of foreign invader here. So this number 2 is going to be our macrophage. So know that macrophages are not really specific yet, but they can start to trigger the specific defense. So the whole green blob here, this is just going to be our invading pathogen. All right. So this is kind of part of the second line of defense here. But once that macrophage actually swallows the invading pathogen, it's going to destroy the pathogen that it swallowed. But what it does is it actually presents the foreign antigen on its surface as a way to trigger the immune response. So here again we have, this is going to be the helper T cell. And this is still going to be an antigen. But notice now that it's actually pushed to the surface of the macrophage. The macrophage does that as a way to kind of signal to the helper T cell saying, hey, this pathogen has invaded, you need to respond to this particular antigen. So the helper T cell recognizes that antigen and it creates a response. So the helper T cell's job is to recognize foreign antigens and organize a response. So the helper T cell does that by releasing chemical signals. It's going to release chemical signals over to the B cells, which are over here, and to the killer T cells, which is this one here. All right, so that's the way the helper T cell helps coordinate a response. It signals to the B cell. The B cells will actually then multiply. So that signal will kind of signal the B cells to multiply and clone themselves. Then they will also signal the B cells to create antibodies. So the B cells will create tons and tons and tons of antibodies, but these antibodies are specific only to this particular antigen. Okay, antibodies are specific. So an antibody that is created for influenza is not going to be effective for, let's say, HIV. Okay, they are specific to particular antigens. The killer T cells, so back here, the helper T cells signal to the killer T cells. The killer T cell's job is, again, to kind of help attack that foreign antigen and they essentially puncture the membrane of the cell in order to damage it and kill it. So killer T cells help with recognizing and damaging cancerous cells, anything that appears mutated. They help with damaging cells that have been invaded by viruses, and they just kind of help in this kind of cleaning up and killing response. All right, then we have the B cells and the T cells also create memory B and T cells. Now, these cells are extremely important in long-lasting immunity. Without these memory cells, our body has no kind of way to mount this response again. This is still just signaling the antigen. All right, so sorry, back over here. Helper T cell signaled to the B cell that there's an invader. The B cells cloned themselves and multiplied. And then those clones created tons of antibodies. Then those antibodies know that they have to bind themselves to that particular antigen. Once they kind of do that, so now these antibodies attach to antigens. And when they do that, they essentially create a larger molecule that's more conspicuous and easier to be swallowed up by macrophages again. And that process goes on until the invading pathogen has been, properly destroyed, all of the pathogens. And once that happens, the suppressor T cell, so once everything is effectively cleaned up, killed, the suppressor T cell will release signals back to the B and T cells and tell them that the kind of invasion is over. So at that point, most of the B and T cells that were created will die, except the memory B and memory T cells remain. So those memory cells, they have developed I don't want to keep using the word memory, but they have essentially a blueprint of that invading antigen. So if that invading antigen were to ever come back again, those memory cells mount the response much quicker, and they basically would kill the pathogen before it even had time to establish itself in the body. That's essentially how vaccines work. They go through this response, they leave behind the memory cells, and then those memory cells are able to trigger a very quick response the second time if that actual pathogen were ever to invade. All right, hopefully that helped, and hopefully you're getting prepared for your blood and immunity unit test, which is on June 1st. All right, take care.